Howdy folks, Rudrose here, and today we will be looking at set championships for Reign of Jafar and the decks that I'm going to recommend you take to the set championships, and maybe some reasons why, well, you shouldn't. So if you haven't seen one of these before, in the past I've had my good buddy Justin Ward on here. He was a top 16 finalist at DLC Vegas, and he made the North American Championships as well. So I've always really appreciated his opinion. Unfortunately, just due to some scheduling issues, it just didn't work out this time, and the set championships came up, I think, way sooner than anyone was expecting. Like, am I crazy? Are they earlier this set, or am I just misremembering from last set? But they just seem way earlier this time than they were in set 7. So, unfortunately, Justin can't be here to join us, so I'm just going to give you my opinion. I'm going to go over some deck lists, and I'm going to give you 2 reasons. 1, why you should bring this to a set championship, and then 2, why maybe you shouldn't. The lists you see on screen, a lot of these are from the World Tournament at Disney World back at the end of June, but these are just for reference. So the list I'm showing you, I'm not saying, if I recommend example here, Amethyst Steel, I'm not saying, hey, you should take these exact cards. These are just here as a reference point. All right, and the first list I'm going to recommend you take to a set championship if you would like to win is the ever-reliable Steel Emerald. Reliable, well, we'll get into that. But nonetheless, I do think this is one of the strongest decks in the game. I think if you were to play in a manner that you're not just blind drawing cards off the top. Let's say you could cultivate every card in the game, right? That you get to pick your starting 7, you just pick them straight from the deck, and you get to pick every card you draw after that. So essentially you're just playing with an open deck and you pick and choose. If that's the case, I think this could be probably the best deck in the game because you always get to your Diablo opening, you just hit your discard, you pummel their hand, and they're just completely out of luck, right? So when this deck goes off, it goes off. And even though red-blue overall is probably the strongest deck in the game, and it's very, very strong, this deck can beat it still because it has the discard mechanic. The discard kind of trumps everything else. I think this deck has a really good matchup into almost every other single deck, maybe with the exception of Blurple, but even then, again, if you see the right opening, as long as they don't see a ton of card draw over and over again, and you just junk their hand, you're going to win. There's no deck in the game that can play when you just junk their hand. It handles aggro pretty well with the Muse's Bounce. You've got plenty of removal. We all know how strong Diablo is, so this deck is very powerful. It has some of the strongest play lines in the game, some of the strongest turns, and it gets to a lockout state, and when it does, there's just nothing your opponents can do. Now, why wouldn't you want to take this deck to a set championship? Well, that consistency issue I mentioned before, right? There are some times, if you don't see the early Diablo line, you don't see the Prince John, the deck just feels kind of weird at times. Sometimes it can lack for card draw. Like, if you don't see the John or the Diablo, you know, you've got to wait till turn 5 for the Beast, maybe 3 if you have the Shift Morph, but even then it's still 4 to draw the card. I've had times where I just don't see those openings, and I just have these weird hands that don't do anything. Muses, against the wrong matchup, doesn't actually do anything. It won't have any targets. Ursula, against the wrong matchup, doesn't have any targets. So the deck can be very self-defeating at times, and that is the only reason I wouldn't take it, is that it's arguably not the most consistent deck, and granted, it's relatively, I don't want to say easy to hit this opening, but it's easy to sculpt for it, but I've had the turns. I've been playing this recently at local where I'm just like, wow, cool, I drew a bunch of high-cost cards, or I drew a strength, and I have no bodies to back it up, and I just don't do anything for 3 or 4 turns, and my opponent's like, all right, well, I'm just going to run away with the game, and it's like, cool, I got Prince John, but your hand is huge already, so, yeah. Inconsistency, I would say, is its biggest flaw, in that there are just sometimes it basically defeats itself. Moving on to my favorite deck in the game, this is a Ruby Amethyst. You see the one on screen is the evasive package. There's also a more traditional package, which I've shown in some of my past set championship videos. Now, why would you want to take this to a set championship? Okay, I'm actually going to start with the reverse. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Of every deck I'm going to show you, and this might shock you to hear it, I think Ruby Amethyst is actually one of the weakest decks in the game. Why? Because it's insanely fair. If you look at this list in particular, what is this deck cheating? What is it getting to do that no other deck gets to do? Well, honestly, not a whole lot, other than Half Shark, but even then, you get to sing what? Friends, and you get to sing Pirate's Life. I guess technically Hades can sing Be Prepared, but there's only one copy. So this deck is very fair. It plays on curve. It's also very slow. No versions are running Flynn Rider anymore. So you're going to be slower than an aggro deck. You're going to be slower than a lot of probably every other purple deck. I actually think it's the weakest strong deck in the game. So if you don't want to play the weakest strong deck in the game, do not take Ruby Amethyst. Now, why should you take it? Well, remember what I mentioned with Emerald Steel, right? Okay, well, what if we have the scenario where you get to pick your starting 7 and you just pick play cards from the deck? Now, in those scenarios, I think every other deck on this list outclasses Ruby Amethyst because we don't have great openings. We're slow. Even if we get to pick what we do, we just take a lot of time. However, games aren't played that way, right? Games are played in real life with real top decking and real card draw. And Ruby Amethyst continues to be probably the most consistent deck in the entire game. Unless I have just absolutely bricked, which has happened on occasion, and it's like, oh, cool, I drew all 4, 5, and 6 drops. I don't have a card to play till turn 4. Outside of those scenarios, I always feel like I'm doing something with Ruby Amethyst, and I always feel like I have a chance. It has, I think, a chance into every single one of these decks. Some are a lot harder than others, and some will really make you wonder, does it really have much of a chance? Yes, it does. So it's consistent. So if you want a deck that is consistent, and I think that is why it is successful at set championships, because card games are so full of inconsistency, I don't think you can go wrong with Ruby Amethyst. Consistency is key, especially for someone like me, who I often feel I have pretty bad luck with cards. Moving on to arguably the best deck in the game is Ruby Sapphire. This is the version that DKP ran in his Worlds winning list. I guess you could still call this the Shark, like Mana Burn version. And then there's a more traditional item version. I think both are incredibly strong. I haven't played with either of them as a deep dive enough to say one is objectively better than the other. I've seen both of them pop off in different ways, and they're both just full of obnoxious really dumb cards like Belle and Scrooge. We mentioned Ruby Amethyst being fair, right? That you have to pay for all this stuff. Well, you don't have to pay for a lot of things in these decks. Tamatoa, free stuff. Scrooge McDuck, free stuff. Belle, free stuff. Sapphire Coil says the Sisus and the Brawls remove anything on your board, which is ridiculous and just shouldn't be allowed. Manor is, of course, a very hefty location that's going to take a lot of challenging power to get rid of. Pirate's Life being cycled on a shark. If you've played against Ruby Amethyst, you know how strong it is. I think this is unequivocally the strongest deck in the game. Even in set 7, when Sapphire Steel made a big comeback, Ruby Sapphire was still right there to keep it in check and to tame it. So the deck's insanely unfun to play against, and a big problem with it is because so few decks can interact with items. Again, if I'm on Ruby Amethyst, you have no way to interact with items in that deck. Lucky Dime comes down, it's staying there. Maurice's Workshop comes down, it's staying there. The amount of items they can draw from Maurice's Workshop is insane. And really the big reason you should say not to take this deck is that it should be weak to aggro, right? Well, that's not always the case. If you watch Worlds, the amount of times Ruby Sapphire, the late game control deck, was able to beat and stop an aggro deck, way more than should be possible. This deck should lose to aggro, but it doesn't always do that, especially with early power like the Belle and the Sisus. So this deck is unequivocally strong. It has almost no downsides, and it's a high recommendation that you should take it. Why shouldn't you take this deck? Probably the only real reason is if you expect heavy aggro in your area. Yes, it can still stabilize against aggro, but if you're having to play aggro again and again and again, that is consistently asking you to find your power cards in the right order every single time. Not impossible, of course, and this deck has proven that it can survive that, but if you really expect a lot of heavy aggro, this deck can absolutely falter against that. Moving on to a Metastar that is returning. This deck never seems to truly go away, and it might be in one of its strongest forms currently thanks to the lever package, pull lever, wrong lever. This deck never really had access to good, strong action removal, but it finally does with the levers, and in particular, they work incredibly well with Diablo. The levers on their own, like, if you just take them in a vacuum, I think they're fine, but I'm not over the moon about them, but they work so well with Diablo because you can use the pull the lever to shift the Diablo. Now it's already in the discard, the wrong lever is already set up, and it gives you some much needed spot removal. So obviously you have the Diablo problem, and then you have the power of this deck that it's always had. The kits, the Ursulas for protection, good challenging. This version actually isn't running Fox, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, however you wish to design it, but it's a consistent deck. It's very fast, but it also has the ability to change tempo. Like, you can put in cards like Merfolk and cards with a lot of extra lore to just really put on lore pressure, but you can also pull back. It's good at challenging the really aggressive decks. It has means to deal with a Daisy Duck through, Merlin or a Rush Peter Pan with the Iago. Fox, whatever your version is. So a strong deck. I think similar to Ruby Amethyst, this deck is awfully consistent. Yeah, you want to see that Diablo opening, at least in this particular version, but so even with the levers not always lining up perfectly, it's a very strong deck that I personally think is quite fun to play, and it's a high recommendation to take to your set championships. Now, why wouldn't you want to take this deck to a set championship? So there's two different ways to play this. There's kind of the discard package, and there's a more consistent package. My girlfriend's running a more consistent one with goats and foxes. We've tested that one out. This one's got a couple more discard outlets, mainly just the Bruno, but I've seen other versions run like Sudden Chill, maybe even Prince John. I'm not over the moon about the discard package. I think it's stronger overall, but it's not as consistent. I feel like these versions are a little more consistent. However, these decks greatly suffer against any of the steel decks. The steel removal continues to just be the bane of this deck's existence, so if you think you're going to run into a lot of steel, you may want to steer clear of this one. It knocks out Iago in one go. It's just going to pick apart your Diablos. They're not going to stick around. Like your body, even something like Genie, it's so easy for them to deal with it when they get a big steel board. So if you think steel's going to be everywhere and isn't steel often everywhere, you might want to steer clear of this one. Speaking of steel, moving on to Steel Amethyst. It's crazy to me. People call this a brooms deck. It's not a brooms deck. This broom has been used in everything. It's added 2 cards that have to deal with brooms, and this one is evasive, so it deals with Diablo. I don't personally go in on the whole Yen Sid thing, because don't get me wrong, it's super powerful when it works. If you see this on 1, Yen Sid on 2, even another Yen Sid on 3, the draw, and then it's got 3 lore, it's really good. But even when I ran a full brooms deck, and I mean a deck loaded with brooms, it was very difficult to consistently get that off, and back in the old Pixelborn days. So, nonetheless, Amethyst Steel is just this, it's kind of this resilient tempo mid-range deck. It's got the Peats to prevent people dropping Be Prepared board wipes. It can bounce, it's the only deck capable of the repeat with the Snake and the Fox to just do it over and over and over again, which is very annoying when your opponent can never play actions. It, of course, has all the instant lore gain with the Goat and the Giant Cobra. It has solid card draw, too, with Genie and Doc being able to refill your hand, and, of course, all the 1-drops can do that as well. And then it's got some spot removal. This deck just kind of has a little bit of everything. And when I play Ruby Amethyst, it's one of the decks that gives me the absolute most trouble. It's quick, it draws cards, it's got the removal. It's just, if you want a deck that all around just kind of does everything, I don't think you can look much further than Amethyst Steel. So why wouldn't you want to take such an excellent deck? I would probably say its biggest issue is sometimes it tends to run out of gas. Now, granted, you can modify your version to have more card draw in it, but if you see this particular version, and this is a world's winning version, there's no friends on the other side, there's no rabbits. You have Genie, which is straight draw, and then your 1-drops, and then Doc. But Doc, of course, you ideally want to do once your hand is empty, and you've seen some of those games where people get bricked with multiple Docs. Yen Sid, kind of, but he's very inconsistent. He's not just a consistent, you play him and you get to draw a card. So I have seen versions of this deck, and then they'll go fast with the Cobra, they'll drop a card, and then suddenly they're just in top deck mode because they've run out of gas. I would say that's the biggest thing holding this deck back. One other thing is that it is pretty reliant on its instant lore pressure, because if you look, the only 2 cards that quest for 2 in this version is the Smee and the Genie. So unless you've loaded up with a bunch of other 2 costs, you may sometimes struggle to get lore through actual questing, especially if your opponent is able to get their engine set up, whatever it is, and really put pressure on you. Moving on to the ever-reliable Steelsong. Next to Ruby Sapphire, I would argue this is actually probably the pound-for-pound strongest deck in the game. It's just insane. The new Rhino has given it obnoxious legs on turn 2. This card is very, very difficult to deal with early, and you've making Ruby Amethyst decks Tekken things like Ursula a Challenger Crab just to answer this guy. The deck has always done what it does, right? It puts out Cindy, and then Troubadour or Ursula, and then any character you put out, gone, gone, gone. It just constantly fires away everything you have. Then it reloads with Whole New World, and then it stops you from playing actions. If you've ever played against Steelsong, you know just how ridiculous this deck is. That it is a legitimate pain in the butt to have to deal with. It is not fun to be on the opposite side of it. Red-Blue is the only deck that I feel like has a pretty consistent matchup into it as far as achieving victory against it, and even then, I have seen this take it from Red-Blue time and time again. It can be pretty versatile, too. It can put on a lot of lore pressure. This particular version doesn't have Daisy, but if they go, you've just seen them, Daisy, Smee, Lawrence. All right, here's 2 lore, 2 lore, 2 lore, 2 lore, 2 lore, 2 lore, 2 lore. There's so much lore in this deck that it used to be one of its weaknesses. So the deck is an absolute powerhouse, and I will never, ever, ever bet against Steelsong. Now, with all that praise, why shouldn't you take this to a set championship? Well, if you expect a lot of Ruby Sapphire, that deck is your greatest weakness, and it's going to give you a lot of issues. So if you think everyone's going to be running red-blue, you might want to steer clear of this, as it's probably going to consistently be able to beat up on you. And the other thing that has always plagued this deck is very similar to the Emerald Steel. There are times it just defeats itself. You see things in a weird order, or you can't find that whole new world. Without the whole new world, unless you can line up the Rapunzel trick, this deck actually struggles for card draw, and I've seen it get into top deck mode so many times. So there are a lot of times this deck just gets to do it at once, but there are other times too it's like, oh, I'm not going to do anything because I haven't seen anything, and I'll just sit here and lose. Okay. My next recommendation is whichever form of aggro you prefer. Here we are showing Amber Steel aggro. There is also Amber Amethyst aggro. There's the Churna Dogs, which is Amber Emerald aggro. I do recommend Amber in some forms. The Amber just has a lot of the aggressive cards, like the Daisy Duck, like Lilo, Baloo. The New Lady is very strong. Piglet, of course. It's whatever your preferred version is. I think they all have different merits. I think they're all strong for different reasons. I probably think the old Dwarven Mine version is probably the most consistent, so I do kind of like something like this if I were to personally pick, but I think they're all good for different reasons. So just whatever your preferred form of aggro is, feel free to take that. Why should you take it? Because of just how strong it can be. There are times that it doesn't actually matter what your opponent does. You hit the right opening, and heaven help them if they stumble, you will just run them over, and then the game's over in 4 to 5 turns. Another great thing is if you're worried about a long day, if it's a set championship with a lot of rounds, aggro can be a great mental break. For better or for worse, your games are over in 10 to 20 minutes, and then you get to scout out the rest of the room, or just go relax, take a bathroom break, get a snack, whatever you need to do to help you unwind or stay focused, whatever works for you at a set championship. So those are all the benefits of aggro, and again, it just has that, hey, I pulled the right cards, game's over. It doesn't actually matter what you do. Now, why shouldn't you take an aggro deck? For the exact same reason you always shouldn't take an aggro deck, and that's it is all or nothing. Either you just run over everyone and you're going to have a great day, or you will completely run out of gas, they will stabilize, and you just lose. And majority of these aggro decks, the moment they run out of gas, they're just dead in the water. There's nothing they can do to come back from it, and that's the whole game. And it's very frustrating and deflating to have this big board, and then, oh, there's the big Sisu. It wipes you out, and no character you ever put on the board will stick ever again. So if you're into that kind of play style, awesome. But for me, that's not my kind of play style. So that's why personally I'm never going to take aggro, because I need to know there's something I can do if the game goes long enough to potentially win, and aggro just does not do that. Last but certainly not least, final deck I will recommend you take to a set championship is good old Blurple, Amethyst Sapphire. I think I'm just so used to the name Blurple, it almost feels weird to call it Amethyst Sapphire. So this has the ramp of the blue decks, but then also has all the card draw and power of the purple decks. But what's nice is you get access to some straight spot removal in both Hades and Let It Go. Very huge. As you can see, not a lot of love for the new, what was it, Into the Unknown. It's kind of crazy that Blurple got, on paper, very good cards, and yet you haven't really seen much of them, but that's a video for another time. So Blurple kind of has the best of both those worlds. So the reason I would take it is if you expect to see other purple and other blue decks. It can do quite well against Ruby Sapphire. Yeah, it doesn't really have a way to interact with items other than a little bit from the new Ice Spikes. Obviously, it can't get them off the field, but it's able to spot remove big threat cards like the Tamatoa, the Shark, the Sisu. The spot removal is so good at just knocking them off the board. I actually think Radigan works quite well in this deck. And it's good against it just with that instant lore gain too, with cards like the Goat. It always gives this deck a little bit of extra reach. So if you're expecting to see other purple and blue decks, I don't think you can go wrong with Blurple. It's a lot of fun. Now, why wouldn't I take it? Because if you are expecting to see a lot of Steelsong, this deck will rip you to pieces. I took Steelsong to a set championship back in, I think it was set 6, and I got to face 2 Blurples. It was like a 5-round set, and 2 of my matches were Blurples, and I was just like, you know that meme with the guy behind the tree and he's rubbing his hands and licking his chops? That was me. And of course, I just trounced it both times, because if you're running an illusion card similar to the Iago, any of their steel removal is going to immediately get rid of it. They have this deck can't deal with a wide board, so that is its biggest weakness. And Steelsong just goes super wide and then says, I mean, what are you going to do? Wait till turn 8, Monstro, and discard your whole hand? That's not going to work. Monstro is not going to save you when that deck has blown you out 4 turns ago. So if you're expecting a lot of steel, particularly Steelsong, I would absolutely avoid Blurple. And those are my personal recommendations for decks I would take to your set championship. I wish you all the best of luck if you are playing in them. Hopefully you get to do several, or maybe you'll just be lucky and you'll win your playmat on the very first one. Hopefully Ravensburger brings back second player support and just top cut support, so you don't just have to win to get the playmat anymore. Very unfortunate. If I left one of your favorite deck combinations out, feel free to list it in the comments below and why you think you should take it, or let me know, hey, this is what I think I'm planning on taking, and these are the reasons why. If you enjoyed this video, please give a like and subscribe to the channel. Closing in on 2,000 subs, and your help can get us there. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, take care.